Welcome back to Pass the Knowledge Check, where I teach you some key information, knowledge checks, and general counterplay tactics commonly used by players. In this video, I'll be covering 9. Key information: unique mobility. 9 has unique mobility in that she cannot run, but instead has a 4-way teleport that can be chained a maximum up to twice in a row, with the added limitation of not being able to double jump after using a teleport. In addition to this, unlike almost every other character in the game, her backdash is not frame 1 invuln. Instead, it's frame 1 projectile invuln and becomes fully invulnerable from frame 5. Drive system. 9's normals are attuned to a specific mana element. A normals are water, B normals are air, and C normals are fire. When a normal connects on hit or block, it will store that element's mana for 9, which is visible around her body. Clashing with projectiles will also store these elements. She can store up to 3 elements, and if a 4th element is stocked, the oldest element will be depleted. Any combination of mana, irrelevant of order, corresponds to a specific spell that can be thrown out with the drive button. The spells are shown in her 2 spell slots above her meter. These are referred to as her active slot, which is closer to the middle of the screen, and her stock slot, which is closer to the edge of the screen, regardless of which side she's on. She can also swap between her active slot and her stock slot by using 236D Seamoss Gate. In Overdrive, 9 gains mana simply for using her normals even if they don't make contact with anything, and using a spell will give her a small damage buff. Normals. 9 has some extra normals compared to the rest of the cast in her 4X and J2X series. The 4X series are effectively quick, short-range jabs that are often used to mash out or to hit projectiles in neutral to store mana. The J2X series is mainly used as an instant overhead and sometimes to lock people down when jumping in. She can jump cancel any of her 5X normals and 6X normals on block, which can be used to get back in when being pushed out by barrier. You should be ready to anti-air these kinds of approaches, but be careful of her movement options that can bait out your attempts in doing so. In addition to this, all of her crouching buttons are lows, and she has a 4th low in her sweep 3C. Lastly, she has 2 standing overheads, 1 special and 1 spell. The special, Navy Pressure, is 27 frames startup, has a minimum distance when used mid-screen, and can't be converted without RC, a pre-placed spell, or a counter hit. Kunzai, or Rock, is 21 frames and lets 9 convert meterless, and is the cornerstone of 9's first layer of mix-ups. Spells. Quite frankly, 9 has a lot of spells. However, most of them don't see much screen time in all levels of her gameplay or aren't very complex to deal with. So rather than going through intricate details of every single one, I'm going to brush over these less common ones and simpler ones to give you a quick summary of what they do and how to get around them. Empty Mana, Everlasting Shawl. The air version sees some use around start as a poke, and is also used to end combos to set up some set play spells. In close range, this is punishable on block and is counter hit recovery. Water Mana. Freeze function similar to Jin's that helps set up for set play. Water is +0 on block. Air Mana. Near full screen poke and tends to be useful for anti-zoning. Air is +0 on block. Fire Mana. Close range launcher and fatal counter. All versions are minus. Water plus air. Skull. This is a floating projectile in front of her that can block projectiles or hit an opponent. It also can't be hit with anything that isn't a projectile, and it runs out after 3 seconds. Air plus fire. Mirror. This is another anti-zoning tool that can reflect projectiles, including supers like Lambda's Legacy Edge. So be careful throwing them out if she has this in her active slot. 9 can fling it across the screen with Crush Trigger, during which it gains an active hitbox. It will dissipate if 9 is hit, and you can also make it disappear by hitting it with a non-projectile attack. Water, Air, Gravity is a spell with a delayed activation which negates jumping within its area of effect, and it will knock you down to the ground if you use any attack that lifts you up high off the ground. However, it does not hinder grounded horizontal momentum. 9 can choose to place this on the opponent or directly in front of herself. Water, Air is a good neutral spell, and it deals high chip damage to health and barrier. It can be manipulated by the 9 to detonate later, further ahead, and or upwards or downwards. It will disappear if 9 is hit before the activation, and you can make it disappear by hitting it. However, if you're too late, it will activate and it will give you a very big wall bounce. Water, Air, Fire. Clock. This starts a countdown of around 10.5 seconds, and when the hand makes 1 full revolution, a massive explosion will occur on the opponent's position for huge damage. This move requires you to barrier block, as it is guard crush property. The clock is removed if either player takes a throw or 9 is hit before its activation, but not if 9 only blocks. 2 spells that will disappear if 9 does block are Amethyst or Lightning Ball, which is water plus fire, or Fairy, which is water, fire. Specials. Next up is Crimson Raider. Crimson Raider is a lariat type move that is -2 on normal block, which gives it a bit of RPS with buttons or teleport when you block it, especially if it's spaced. If you have a 6-frame button that hits crouches, like Naruto, you'll be able to press 5A every time, unless they use a reversal. Next up we have Malvet. Malvet is a dedicated anti-air, which more often than not will counter hit and wall bounce or wall splat. It has a big hitbox, so don't get too predictable with when you're approaching 9 from the air. Navy Pressure is a 4-screen overhead with a minimum distance and is classed in the game as a projectile. This move causes fatal counter and ground bounces, so it's very useful against long-range zoners. So if you play a long-range zoner, you don't want to get too predictable with your committal zoning tools. It also causes hard knockdown, which can make you roll if you forget to release down back as you tech from the knockdown. Seamoss Gate allows 9 to swap the spells in her active and stock slots. Proper application of this special will enhance her pressure, set play and combo game, so you don't want to let her get away with too many of these in block string pressure. Knowledge checks. Let's talk about Rock. Rock is 9's staple can opener at all levels, but especially at the lower to mid levels of the game. Rock needs 1 water mana and 2 fire mana, which allows for a number of tricky things to be done based on which mana was stored first and which mana was stored last. It's also +6 on regular block, which... wait, what? What the f? Which, due to her lack of microdash, generally isn't actually an issue thanks to barrier blocking her normals prior. A lot of counterplay versus this is going to come down to familiarity versus the player, as she has a lot of freedom in how she can present this spell in her strings and set play. But I'll try to outline some common tricks for you. Generally speaking, in the first place, in an average block string with no RC, no play spells available, you should be able to react to and block Rock consistently. So here are a few methods for doing that. First is to look at 9's animation herself, as every 3 mana spell like Rock will always cause her to do a specific animation where she raises both of her hands above her head on the first frame. This animation is unique to her 3 mana spells, none of which are fast flows, which means you can use this as a tell for the overhead consistently. Downside is that it may cause you to not appropriately counter other 3 mana spells that require a different reaction to deal with, potentially causing you to hold unnecessary pressure. The second option is to look at the space above your character's head when you think she may use Rock. This one doesn't need to be done all the time, as you can switch between looking over your head at any time 9 stocks water and fire mana. However, this may prevent you from reacting to and countering Seamoss Gate due to not actually seeing it clearly. It can also cause you to struggle against Crush Trigger. However, if you're barriering her normals anyway, this probably shouldn't be an issue. The third and final strategy is to look at 9's active slot. If you see Rock appear, then disappear to an empty slot, you can use this to react and block Rock too. However, this may cause you to miss other actions like Crush Trigger, walking forward for a throw, or using Seamoss Gate, jumping, and walking forward for a pressure reset. It will also be harder to react to Navy Pressure, so be careful. In conclusion, whether you choose to stick to one method of reacting to Rock or using multiple, know that each one comes with its own risks and counterplay. I also don't recommend using Overdrive against Rock, unless you have a reversal that will hit her or she's within range of your EA. It's better to use Overdrive on any normal that isn't a 4x normal, as they all have large recovery for 9 and can net you a big decent punish. Rock is also exceptionally good at anti-air crushing thanks to how it holds some momentum in the air and comes down with the projectile. So if 9 is jumping over you with this in her active slot, I highly advise passing under her instead of trying to anti-air her, or just simply waiting. I've been told it's also good to know which specials can turn into Rock from one normal, so that in the case where you return to neutral for one reason or another, you can be ready for the next time you interact. These are Amethyst, Wind Fire, Seed with Wind being the oldest mana stocked, Clock with Wind being the oldest mana stocked, or Fairy with Water being the oldest mana stocked, and level 2 Fire. One of the ways 9s can make Rock hard to react to is when they use Crimson Raider to mask the Rock animation. The second hit of Crimson Raider has a big explosion, which can be used to mask an RC into Rock due to how much visual noise it produces. In situations like this, I would recommend focusing on either 9's active spell slot or the space above your head, as opposed to 9's physical animation, because you likely won't be able to see it. Speaking of which, Crimson Raider alone is -2 on block, so if you don't have a 6-frame button to press out of block stun, you need to ID the second hit to prevent teleport from being a reliable get out for the 9. One of the things you should be aware of about 9 supers is that Cardinal Nova is +5 on block. While it does lack immediate inval on startup, it can be used to cover your wake up reversal and then keep their turn afterwards, so be aware of that. It's not a really common strategy, but it is something that can happen, and if you have Overdrive, you can punish this pretty heavily. And we can't talk about 9 dealing with your reversals without talking about dealing with 9's reversal, Flax Nurture. 9's DP is -4 on regular block. Yes, I know it sounds egregious, but there's a couple properties that this special has that will allow you to counter it effectively. Firstly, 9 must have any combination of mana stocked in her active slot in order to have access to this reversal. If she doesn't have it, she will perform the animation but will not have invulnerability and the attack will not come out. Secondly, Flax startup is very slow for a reversal at 22 frames. This gives every character enough time to Gatling OS an instant block to make it -7, which every character has a button to punish with. You do this by timing a button to hit when they wake up, then buffering the next normal after, and then pressing back shortly after the second input. On block or hit, you should be able to react to the situation. If you want to avoid DP RC or just want to get a bigger punish in general, you can also backdash instead. Some characters will be better at this than others, due to their Oki options and or normals that they can use to actually reach afterward. This is especially easy if your meter is a jump in like Hibiki or Ragnar at times. If your backdash doesn't give you enough time to punish, you can consider neutral jumping over or using a character specific quirk like Hackerman's projectile cut to punish. Universally, every character can use Overdrive to invuln through the attack and go for an even bigger punish that way as well. Next up is 3 mana spells that aren't made up of the same 3 elements, generally have slow start up and can't be used reliably alone in block strings. The only exception to this being Rock. You should make it a goal to not let 9 get away with using 3 mana spells consistently on block without getting punished. She's in counter hit state during the recovery, so lab your punishes. Generally speaking, established 9s won't be trying to use 3 mana spells that aren't Rock often, but it's just to make sure that you're not getting cheesed out. Cross is probably the one that's hardest to react to and punish without getting hit yourself, but like I said, you can see the normals that she's charging up beforehand, so if you notice that they're leading up to a spell that isn't Rock, you can get ready to press a button in the meantime. Now, while 3 mana spells are easily reactable and punishable in block strings, Seamoss Gate is one that is going to be a bit harder to deal with. Experienced 9s will use this to throw off your counter attack timing, or even just use it to store something to use later and reset to neutral or pressure. 9 can cancel her gate recovery into a spell, including Empty Mana, Shawl, or any other quick 1 mana spell that can be used to counter attack your punish attempt. Try to read what the 9 you come up against will do if you can, but if they're making good use of gate, consider using more safer options, escaping with dash jump if you think they're going to use 5x for a spell, or dash barrier if you think they will call out your jump and use 6x. Or you can simply wait to see what they choose and then take action afterwards. Seamoss Gate is also good for baiting ODR along with 4x, so be careful that you aren't over predictable with when you want to use it to punish her strings. Generally speaking, after freeze, if 9 falls with JA, it's most likely going to be a Fairy Oki or a Rock reset. If they fall with JB, it's most likely going to be a Cloud setup. And if they fall with JC, it's most likely going to be a Seed setup or a Rock reset. Fairy Oki. After a freeze, JA 5A 3C gives 9 a knockdown and lets her summon Fairy. This lets her threaten instant overhead J2A and convert from it with the Fairy hits. Long story short, don't emergency tech this because if you get mixed before the first hit of Fairy, then damage 9 can potentially output is very high. So always neutral tech or backwards roll if they don't commit to stopping it. In the corner, 9 can cover tech options and still have enough frame advantage to threaten J2A, in addition to being able to time teleport to make the Fairy hit cross up. Rock resets. Rock resets are also very common after a freeze, which can be initiated with a falling JA or JC. Try to keep a similar mindset to a block string where you default block low and use whatever method you prefer to react to the overhead. Rain produces a lot of visual noise, making it hard to see Crush trigger when she's right on top of you, so hold barrier by default in this situation as you should still be able to react to a purple throw. Rain is usually followed up by either an unblockable setup with Seed and Navy pressure or an instant overhead setup with J2A. Fully unblockable, if you use emergency tech, 9 needs to use 4 normals, then summon Seed and then time its low attack to hit close or on the same frame as Navy pressure's overhead. For neutral tech, 9 only needs to use 3 normals in order to fully knock you down, then use Seed and then use the overhead. If you emergency tech and she only does 3 normals, then there's a gap to jump out and avoid the unblockable. Of course, overdrive on the normals or the Navy pressure itself is also a way out of the setup. For the instant overhead, on emergency tech, 9 uses 2 normals into Crimson Raider to kill the time before Rain activates. On neutral tech, just 1 normal is enough. Similarly, you can use overdrive on the Crimson Raider or after it, or you can also use counter assault on the Crimson Raider on reaction as well. Seed Oki. Lastly, Seed Oki from freeze also gives a hard to block or an unblockable. On emergency tech, rising J2A overhead will hit meaty just before the Seed low, but if delayed for a couple of frames, it will be the same frame. So you can technically try to switch block quickly if you think they're going to do the J2A meaty, and if you think that they're going to delay the overhead so that they hit at the same time, then you can try and jump out, so it's a little bit of an RPS. If you neutral tech, this turns the unblockable into a high-low with J2A and 2x, which gets converted by the Seed. Here you just need to guess, and you can use the overdrive as well to give you a big punish. In conclusion, while watching out for rock resets, use emergency tech versus Cloud Oki, which is the falling JB, alongside barrier and instant barrier, and utilizing overdrive or counter assault when you have them available. Then use delay or neutral tech versus fairy or seed Oki, which is the falling JA or JC, and also using overdrive when possible. And lastly, some more counterplay general notes. Lightning Ball is one of 9's very strong tools that are good in neutral and on pressure. It's +7 on block and it's active for a really long time if you don't block it. In neutral, this will force most of the cast into 2 options, block or avoid. However, due to 9's limited mobility, she has to be careful about timing her movement to match up with the ball's trajectory. So a good tactic for most characters is to force the ball to make contact with them earlier than the 9 will anticipate by using dash barrier break. In general, you want to vary your decision making when it comes to dealing with this ability anyway. Fairy in neutral. We covered this on Oki, but in neutral, just remember which directions the fairy comes from each time. Diagonal down towards you, horizontally from behind, then vertically from above you. Keeping this in mind will be useful to avoid getting locked down in neutral and avoiding holding pressure. Countering teleports in neutral. While teleports on wake up can be somewhat manageable, it can be hard dealing with them in neutral. Generally, if I see a 9 teleporting, I'll use standing or jumping jabs to try and hit them out of them. I highly advise against using dedicated commit or anti-airs like 6As or 2Cs before 9 has expended both of her teleports. And lastly, don't forget to use overdrive and barrier on her basic block string pressure, as it can give you a lot of breathing room and even swing momentum back your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.